Hello, everyone. I would like to begin by thanking you all for being here tonight and sharing this space with us. Welcome to the Students of English Studies Associations, or CESA's, 6th annual keynote event. I'm Mia De La Cerda, co-president of CESA, and I would also like to introduce you to my fellow co-president, colleague, and best friend, Julieta Ortiz. We are honored to have the opportunity to be joined by our keynote author and professor, Manuel Muñoz. It is my pleasure to introduce him this evening. Manuel Muñoz's new collection of short stories, The Consequences, was published by Graywolf Press in 2022. He is the author of 2 previous collections of short stories, Zigzagger and The Faith Healer of Olive Avenue, which was shortlisted for the 2007 Frank O'Connor International Short Story Award, and a novel, What You See in the Dark. Muñoz has been recognized with the Whiting Writers Award, 3 O. Henry Awards, an appearance in the Best American Short Stories, and most recently, a long-listed author for the 2023 Joyce Carol Oates Prize. His frequently anthologized work has appeared in the New York Times, Virginia Quarterly Review, American Short Fiction, Zazava, and Freeman's. A native of Dinuba, California, Muñoz currently lives and works in Tucson, Arizona. The theme for this year's CESA Symposium is centered on the idea of transcending boundaries and creating space within limited and restricted spaces. The conference interrogates how one can navigate current structures to unearth alternate possibilities for the future and transcend dichotomies. Muñoz is a clear example of an author who has managed to navigate limited spaces and create space for individuals through his stories. Manuel Muñoz, as a Valley native, has a deep understanding of the demographics of its inhabitants and some of the issues that affect this land. With both his connection to the Central Valley and the themes of place, identity, narrative, and space explored within his writing, his voice is a critical addition to the symposium. Growing up and living in a place as conservative and limiting as the Central Valley, his stories bridge their own worlds, make space for themselves where space has not been allotted, and give voice to a group of individuals that have otherwise been left voiceless. Many of us at the university have read his work and admire the work he's done, both as a writer and a scholar. Additionally, many of us, including myself, have found our own voices through his writing. Please join me in welcoming Manuel Muñoz.
I'm really so happy to be here. I'm so proud to be here. Anybody else from Dinuba here? Yeah, I was about to say Jefferson. more to the point. Munson Sultana. I'll say that.
Hold on.
Yeah.
That's Raiders.
Parlier? You can say it, right? Say it. Parlier. Orange Cove? Fowler? Selma? I know there's some. Selma? No. Porterville? I know there's a Porterville. Porterville? Kerman? Kerman? That's right. I knew there was a Kerman. Los demás vienen. Parlier. Fowler? That's Juan Felipe Herrera's place. Fresno, I know somebody. There's Fresno here too. You can say that one out. Fresno. Well, it's nice. The reason I'm asking, Cutler Rossi, Ivanhoe, all these little pueblitos, all these little places are the places we know. Even we were just chatting, whether we know them or not, or we've been there or not, they're in our minds and they're in our hearts, and how we might choose to think about them creatively. I was very nervous, to be honest with you, about coming to speak tonight, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I'm coming home. It's about coming home. And everything's amplified when I'm here. The best readings I've ever done, to be honest, have been in Reedley College, because it's 6 miles from where I grew up. And to see people have the experience of hearing someone talk about our place together and approach literature that way is just, it does something to me. And yeah, I'm hoping it's going to be the same opportunity. But I wanted to start with a little bit of a story. I tried to write a keynote, and then I realized I couldn't do it. So this is what I chose. I was going to do is I'll read an essay that I think speaks to some of the topics tonight. Open it up for some questions. Depending on how the questions go, I'll choose between 1 or 2 stories that I have in the back of my head. I think they'll be good. And I won't read the whole story, but to just give you an inkling of what this voice sounds like. But I wanted to start by reading a poem from this book. If you recognize it by sight, this is Black Hair by Gary Soto. This is a 1985 collection. Jefferson Peters is here knows who I'm talking about. Mrs. Swift was an English teacher at Dignova High School. I must have been 16 years old. I'm thinking I was a sophomore. And she asked me, I turned in some writing to her, and she said back to me, Manuel, this is really nice, but I don't know why you are describing snow, autumn leaves, pine trees, or those little brick walls that Charlie Brown and Linus used to put their elbows on. She said, that's not the valley. Why don't you write about the orchards and the fog? And I remember saying to her, well, I don't write my stories here because nothing happens here. The worst thing I could have said. The very next day, she got me this copy of Black Hair. This was brand new. This was, for back then, this was, like I said, a 1985 text. So it's 1988, very fresh, right? She brings it to me. Now imagine you being 15 or 16 years old, and this is the first poem you read. It's the title poem from Black Hair. At 8, I was brilliant with my body. In July, that ring of heat we all jumped through, I sat in the bleachers of Romaine Playground, in the lengthening shade that rose from our dirty feet. The game before us was more than baseball. It was a figure, Hector Moreno, quick and hard with turned muscles, his crouch the one I assumed before an altar of worn baseball cards in my room. I came here because I was Mexican, a stick of brown light in love with those who could do it, the triple and hard slide, the gloves eating balls into double plays. What could I do with 50 pounds, my shyness, my black torch of hair about to go out? Father was dead, his face no longer hanging over the table or our sleep, and mother was the terror of mouths twisting hurt by butter knives. In the bleachers, I was brilliant with my body, waving players in and stomping my feet, growing sweaty in the presence of white shirts. I chewed sunflower seeds. I drank water and bit my arm through the late innings. When Hector lined balls into deep center, in my mind, I rounded the bases with him. My face flared, my hair lifting beautifully because we were coming home to the arms of brown people. Qué bonito, no? Now, if you think about just how that might have affected me when I was 15 or 16, when we read maybe looking for just a mirror, and we're not yet learning how to read with dimension, with refraction. I'm ever grateful to Mrs. Swift for this. It was, I don't want to say it was given to me in anger, but just like, I'll show you. And she also gave me, another one that I still have is a copy of James Joyce's Dubliners. And it was the same thing. She told me, she said, this is a whole other world away. She said, but when you read it, now it was hard for me at 16. But her whole point was, whatever you think you're going through is on the page. It's on literature. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second. Here's the essay that I wanted to read. Speaking of Ireland, this book is being is published by the Indigo Press in the UK. And they asked me to read or write an essay. And it was one of those, why do you write essays? And gosh, I was like, I feel like I keep answering this question. Nobody's ever satisfied with my answer, right? So I wrote this, and you can find it if you go to the Indigo Press. You'll Google me. You'll eventually find it. But I wanted to read it because these things, even in the age of social media, you post something and like people like it 4 times and then it goes away, right? Like it's lost in the ether, but it's there, and I wanted to read it to you, and we'll see how it ties into what we're talking about tonight. It's called Righting the Wrong. writing being W-R-I-T-I-N-G. I teach creative writing, mostly to undergraduate students, and they sometimes come to me for advice and guidance about graduate school. Many of them have never left the state of Arizona in the southwest desert corner of the United States and are more eager to have a change in environment than consider the caliber of a program. And notice, I know if I'm being explanatory, they kept telling me, like, write it for the UK, because we don't know where Arizona is in the US, so keep that in mind. Some of them panic over the idea of another set of entrance exams or about student loans, and nearly all of them believe that their make or break moment for admission will come in their statement of purpose. They want to know how a strong statement might sound. They want to know if there is a right answer to the question about why they want to be a writer. Every one of my students is different from the other. I remind them of that, encouraging them to take into consideration what might be different about how they've moved in their worlds, academic and otherwise. But one common piece of advice that I give them is to never start with their statement with the phrase, "I've always wanted to be a writer." When they ask why, I tell them that over half of the admissions essays I have read in my time as a professor have begun with that phrase. Not only is the phrase a cliche, so are nearly all of the anecdotes that tend to come with it. The novel that was drafted at age 12, the cracking open of a first diary or journal, or hearing a beloved author read aloud for the first time. Everyone seeks the origin story out of the start. In a way, we as readers keep asking to hear some version of it. I don't think I could answer my students' dilemma any better. Even now, after 4 completed books in almost 20 years, the curiosity about what started it all is sometimes at the heart of the questions that can come my way. I was, after all, a scholarship kid from a small rural town in California, who landed at Harvard. I could say that I wanted to be a writer then, but I was only 18 years old. Maybe the idea had grown from seeing so many glossy university catalogs, students studying on the grass or practicing a musical instrument. The captions encouraged me to think of college as a place for exploration. I was used to practicality. Sometimes I tell my students it might be best to write about what almost stopped them from writing altogether. At Harvard, to clear a first-year composition requirement, I took a class designed to appeal to those of us who wanted to be writers, writing for writers or something like that, which allured me instantly. It was the only class I had that was a small seminar. The room not only intimate, but intimidating. Just a handful of us working together. All of my first-year courses were large lectures where I could easily hide in the back row. We weren't writing about science or ethics or history, which many of those exposition courses were designed to introduce us to, but about ourselves. In other words, the personal essay, which even my roommates seemed to think would never be of use. The course had all the elements of what I had imagined college to be. It may have been in Seaver Hall, an imposing brick building at one end of Harvard Yard, where most of my English courses were, at a large dark archway as its main entrance, a foreboding cave amidst the green pathways and leafy trees of the yard. Seaver is S-E-V-E-R. If you want to Google it, you'll see it. It looks like a big dragon mouth when you go in. We sat at a long table with the professor at the head of it, notebooks scattered about, and every student scribbling down some sudden wisdom. It was the first time I glimpsed a workshop, and I didn't know that that's what we were actually doing was a workshop, what it meant to share a draft of a work in progress. I don't remember much of what I wrote in that class, nor even if the other students had much to say about it. What I do remember is a very long discussion, an interminable one, over my use of the word soundlessly. I'll never forget this. I wasn't the first person in my family to go to college. My father had taken English language and some adult education courses, pushed along by an employer who had promised promotions and better pay to any worker who could speak English well enough without needing a translator around. My father brought workbooks home. He went to Fresno State. He would take night classes. And I'd peek at some of the pages, curious to see his handwriting. My oldest sister had taken courses at a community college, Reedley, just 6 miles away from town. Written communication or something to that effect to get better pay at her office job. I'd gone along with her to one of her night classes so she'd have someone to walk her safely back to the parking lot. My other sister, Lisa, whom Jefferson knows very well, only a year older than me, was the first to attend a first-year institution, UC Santa Barbara. She had managed all of the applications herself, no small feat, when no one in the family had ever written a college entrance exam or scouted appropriate scholarships or applied for a student loan solita. If there were rules to follow, she had no map in front of her. I mention all of them because I sometimes wonder how they faced being in a classroom, how they felt when it was their turn to offer an answer, or how they might have reacted when their effort was deemed wrong. I don't recall what I could possibly have been writing about in that first year class. I could only have the wrong word. Excuse me for a second. I only have the wrong word to guide me soundlessly. I must have written about one or two of two powerful early memories, ones that I can summon even now. The first being out in the grape vineyards during harvest season when I was very young, loathing the heat and the dirt and sulking under the vines. I was watching the leaves move here and there in the hot breeze, and I was wishing for an easier life. And then the other one, during the night that my grandmother died, being summoned by her in a dream, her hand knocking on a door that wouldn't make a sound. Who knows what the other students made of what I tried to remember? I must have written about one of those two things. Who knows if any of them had the grace to approach the draft as only an effort, the first step in a journey where a writer might later take us to a more astonishing place. Instead, it was the wrong word. This isn't even a real word, one of them had scrawled in the margins. I tell my students all the time that writing is a confusing world of perceived rules and intimate codes, a place where you might be lauded in one circle for breaking boundaries, but mocked in another for not knowing its currency. I think about that scrawl in the margins of my draft, how I went to the library to look up the word for myself. Like I actually went to the library, it's pre-Google, and I looked, there it was. I was secretly relieved when I found it on the page. It existed, but it didn't change anything because I didn't know how to counter someone who was so sure of how correct he was. Looking back on it now, I see that he must have heard some teachers say that adverbs were supposed to be avoided or minimized, but he wielded that in a way to critique and exclude. A rule where a single word was more than enough to dismiss a whole story. The damage was done. I didn't say a whole lot in the class thereafter. And that actually, I was a very quiet undergrad and graduate. We can maybe talk about that in the Q&A. The Consequences is my first book in 11 years. The stories were difficult to write for a variety of reasons, but doubt played a big part. The editor of my novel, this one that's right here, upon receiving the first draft, had responded with a brief, if curt, "This is too cerebral." Some version of that student's dismissive scrawl was in that comment. but I was older and more experienced. I didn't need to point to any dictionary. I could point to the authority of my imagination, or at least I felt I had earned the audacity to do that. Still, the sense that I had not met some expectation who I could be as a writer kept me at a remove from so many of my drafts afterwards. Surely I was doing something wrong. Surely there was a wrong word in there, some misstep. Surely this wasn't the story I should be writing. So, what story should I be writing? I think back to my father's half-finished English workbooks. I wonder why he didn't keep up with his studies. The answer might be a simple one. He got the course credit he needed and a paycheck, even if his English remains halting and uncertain to this day. Or my sister, who typed out her essays on a baby blue Corona typewriter, I wish I still had it, who couldn't be bothered anymore with being bone tired in those long evening classes after a full day of work. My other sister would have been the first person in our family to graduate from college from a 4-year, but had health complications that prevented it. When I picture them in their various classrooms, I see them amongst people who were there for the same reasons. Other field workers like my dad, office clerks, young women in their early 20s like my older sister, Valley kids on scholarship like my other sister, settling in among the palm trees and the bicycles on the seaside campus. Everyone looked like them. Starting with that first writing workshop, that's never been the case for me. I stood out. What I wrote about required explanation. What I wrote about wasn't familiar. What I wrote about couldn't be probable. I don't know why I persisted back then. To a certain degree, I don't know why I persist even today. If I could just stop for a second, I realized that some of the things that I've been writing in this essay were things that I were trying to write in the keynote. There it is again. Just me. To a certain degree, I don't know why I persist even today. None of the usual answers satisfy. Not the triumphant story of tenacity, not the defiance of putting the doubt and proving the doubt's false. Why do you write? The question is asked. Why do you want to be a writer? The question keeps coming, and more often than not, the answer always makes me feel wrong. I tell my students to try their best to get at the essential mystery, not of their writing, but of their persistence. What kept them on the path? What could have pulled them in another direction? What made the expression so invaluable? For me, it is the only way I know to access the reservoir of feeling behind so much of what I have seen. I have had no other way to shape it, but perhaps by reading with depth and breadth, I could keep learning to do so. I might learn what to do with the empty space of my father's half-finished English workbooks, what to do with the crimped and unsteady markings of his handwriting. I might know how to make something of the box of neat, expensive onion skin typing paper that my sister kept for her essays, the hesitation she had in committing something to the page because that paper was just so expensive. Or my other sister, when it was time to acknowledge that she could not continue her studies, shelving her books within eyesight just in case, maybe one day. Or maybe I write because one story, however hard gained, is better than none at all. And there's some value in working through the glimpse of a moment to gather what it might mean. Witness. One of my first summer jobs out of the fields was as an office clerk in a county job placement center in Dinuba. I was in 8th grade, lanky and studious, and big-headed and mild-mannered, very awkward. Adults trusted me with responsibility. I was tasked with archiving old paper applications into file folders. The applications needed to be alphabetized and separated by job placements, each one in a separate folder with the last name written neatly at the top. Janitorial work in nursing homes here, shipping and receiving in fruit packing houses over there, clerical work in that pile. I worked my way through them until I got to the ones that were only a single slip of paper. No skills, or so it said at the bottom of the page. A folder for each one of those applications, each one of those pleas, each of those asks for assistance. I made my way through the M's. I found my mother's. I didn't need to read it to know what it said. She had never made it past third grade. I made a folder for it, wrote the last name on the file tab, and added it to the archive box. Soundlessly, as it was a quiet room with only me in it, standing in the stillness of all those files, putting the true story together. Let's do Happiest Girl. Let's do the Happiest Girl. The happiest girl in the whole U.S.A. Timoteo really is nothing special. Shorter than me and rounder, and hardly even a smile to break the dark moon of his face. I say no one special because it is still, after all these years, just me and him. No one special because I'm no different from any of the women who line up at the town bank, ready to exchange my saved collection of coins for a wad of sweaty bills. It takes money to get a man back from the border, more money than most might think. Some of us have a ring on our fingers and some of us don't, but we all know what it means to watch the calendar turn to the last of the month. We know what some of the farmers do on final Fridays, and we know what to do on Saturday mornings. The farmers put their dusty hands on a phone receiver and very calmly place a call to the migra. Then the men in the green uniforms arrive at the rows of whatever crops are in season, grapes or peaches or plums, and round up the men in vans. No one ends up paid for the week's labor, and everyone gets a standard booking in either Visalia or Fresno before being hustled back onto the vehicles. By nighttime, the vans reach Bakersfield and start the slow ascent into the mountains. They will head to Los Angeles, where all our men know it's easy to get lost but expensive to live, then on to San Diego, where it's just expensive to live. Finally, they'll reach the border itself at Tijuana, where the van doors open to let all of the men out so they can start over again. The bank teller counts out the bills as quickly as she can. She is a very pretty white girl who always wears skirts, her hair pulled up with simple barrettes. She knows the bus from Fresno stops once a week in her town now, Saturdays mid-afternoon in front of the barber shop, as if the whole drama of deportation and return was a big plan between the migra and the charter companies. She hurries, and though she never says much of a pleasant word to any of us, I think it is because she doesn't want us to miss the only bus going out of town, the only way to get our men back. I often wonder about the history of her good luck. I don't always know what to think of the fact that she doesn't have a ring on her finger, if it is a good or a bad thing. It's always the same when I board the bus. It's already half full, mostly women from Fresno and the little towns just south of it, like Fowler and Selma. I get a seat alone, and the bus moves on to Goshen and Tulare and Delano, each woman who boards more weary than the last. They're all like me, or at least they look like me. I don't know their histories. I don't know if they came from South Texas like I did, or taken from school in the third grade to work in the fields like me. I was resentful of my parents for giving me the life of a dumb mule, and I left them almost to the minute of my 18th birthday with only a scrap of paper with their address and a phone number that I never ended up using. I walk around with a lot of pride because I did that, because I proved that I could support myself in a hard world. I did all right for myself for a while. Then I fell in love. When we get to Bakersfield, the bus is packed and a young woman boards with a big sigh and looks at the seat beside me. Con permiso, she says before she moves to sit down. I know just from looking at her that this is her first trip. She carries a cheap white purse in one hand and a bulky shopping bag in the other. She reminds me of all the women in town who everybody knows has just recently arrived from Mexico because they go to the grocery store in high heels and tight dresses, doing their best to be like the American women they see on television. She wears a purple dress and white high heels, and just by that, I know she spends too much time watching the afternoon soap operas, not understanding that the women on these shows only scheme because they have no jobs to go to. It will take a while for her to someday let the TV station rest on the evening news with Jessica Savage, the kind of person I wish I was smart enough to sound like, when the need to listen to English for practice turns into a wish to look like an intelligent and confident woman. She sits down quickly as the bus begins to pull out of the station, and when she adjusts the shopping bag under her legs, I look at her hands, but there isn't a ring to be found. The bus is back on the road, and soon enough I can feel the rise into the mountains, the ascent into Los Angeles. My stomach flutters like the times when Timoteo and I boarded the cheap traveling carnival rides that sometimes set up in the town park, and I placed my hands on my ribs, remembering. Are you hungry? The young girl says to me in Spanish. I didn't know that she had been looking at me, and before I can answer, she reaches into the shopping bag and brings out something wrapped in foil. When I don't take it immediately, she begins to unwrap it, a taco of corn tortilla and something orange, and tears off a piece for herself. Take it, she says, handing me the part still in the foil. It's cold, but delicious chorizo potato. I nod my thanks. Where are you headed? She asks. Los Angeles, I answer. I think to ask where she might be headed, but I already know. She says nothing for a moment, and just when I feel bad that I haven't asked her a question, she finishes her food and carefully pulls a tissue from her bra to wipe her fingers. Do you know Los Angeles very well? She asks. What do you mean? Do you know the city? Do you know your way around? I know some places around the bus station, I mean. She dabs at her lips with her tissue before balling it into her fist. Would you help me when we get there? Help you how? She reaches into her cheap white purse and pulls out a folded piece of paper. The bus had darkened with the coming of sundown, and the roads curve into the high walls of the mountains. She shows me the paper, a map, in the bare light. He told me to look for the park, she says. I know the park, and I know the agreed routine, Pershing Square, where I know to wait overnight to see if Timoteo might show up at Tijuana. Spending a night at a motel near 7th Street, where the doors open out to the city's loud darkness. If Timoteo doesn't show, then I know to board the bus to San Diego, this time to the bus station almost within sight of the border, as if both countries wanted to make everything easier on everybody. Nearby is a park, just like the one in Los Angeles, where everyone waits and waits and waits. If I don't show up there, Timoteo always tells me, then you know it's over. I know the park, I say to her. It's very close by. Would you mind showing me? Of course, I say, but maybe I don't say it with much conviction. No, really, she says. I don't know where I'm going. I've never had to stop in Los Angeles, and it's a scary city. It's big, but not scary when you get used to it. You've been there a lot? When did you cross over? I was born here, I tell her, in English. Then I say it to her in Spanish, and I let her stay silent for a moment so she could know who she's talking to. To me, she's a young girl without a name. She's someone who might not have anything in her purse except the folded up map, who might not know how much money to take on a trip like this. I take the map from her hand. Who are you going to see? I ask and tilt the paper toward the fading light of the bus window. She doesn't answer. You don't have to be married to be in love, I tell her. I understand. She leans her head toward me as if to study the map together, but there's nothing to study. The street is a straight shot from the bus station to the park, but I trace its path for her with my finger. When we get off at the station, a lot of people will head here, along this street, over to the park, I say. It's a long walk in the dark, but if you stay close to the group, you can feel safe. You can take a taxi if you want to, but I think it's a waste of money. And sometimes the drivers circle around just to cheat you, so be careful. Thank you, she says to me, and I can tell by how she says it that she wants to insist one more time that I show her. But I meant to say we and a lot of people and stay close to let her know that she should just follow everyone, all of us on the same trip, the same type of man at the other end. She's too young to understand, though. My name is Natalia, she says. Good to meet you, I tell Natalia. The bus has gone dark and I can feel the gradual descent toward Los Angeles, so I lean my head against the window. I close my eyes as if to nap, but I don't offer my name. She's quiet while I pretend to nap, and with my eyes closed, I think back to a Natalia I knew back in South Texas, one of two other girls in my third grade class. They were good friends to me, both of them, Natalia and the other one, and we sat in the last row of the classroom while the rowdy boys tried to impress the teacher. I remember third grade because it was the last year I ever had in school. I was a smart girl, smarter than the boys, and I was filled with a need to prove myself better than them. One day, our teacher asked us this question: which weighed more, a pound of feathers or a pound of gold? The boys went out of their way to explain why one would be heavier than the other until I finally raised my hand. When the teacher called on me, I said without hesitation, a pound is a pound, no matter what. On the bus, I opened my eyes again to the silence I remember from the classroom. In the dark, all the women are sleeping. This new Natalia next to me, not the same girl, but the same thinking. Latch on to someone who can move around in the world, someone who can help you. I can't imagine whatever happened to those girlhood friends if they ever got out of South Texas. But I remember they were sweet to me after the teacher opened the top drawer of her desk, and came down the aisle with a white ribbon in her hand. The room went silent, almost dark from everyone's watching, and the teacher placed the ribbon in front of me. Do something with your life, they said that. When we arrive at the station, I have to go with Natalia ahead so we can get off the bus. She stands so bewildered with her two bags at the rush of the station that it's all I can do to not take her hand in mine. Come, I tell her, as a group of our fellow passengers makes its way to the exits, and she follows me through the grimy bustle of the station, the sleepy eyes, the baby strollers, the impatience. The better part of me says I should turn around to make sure she's close behind, that she hasn't been swallowed up by what is, for her, the surprise of so many people at 9 in the evening. I don't ask if she's hungry, if she'd like a drink, or even if she needs a restroom. There is never time for anything like that on a trip like this. And she follows me past the coffee dispensing machines, the bank of payphones, the ticket counters with their long lines of arguments. We follow the other passengers who have been on the bus, all of us a flock of birds, swerving onto the street. Natalia is having trouble keeping up. She figured out that her white shoes are not made for walking. But I tell her nothing about the stupidity of wearing a dress. She should be smart enough for this world on her own. I think to myself, for the day that demands she do this trip alone, with no one to help her. I can hear the click of her heels along the sidewalk, so I know she's behind me. The sweat of my brow appears quickly. On my brow appears quickly. Sometimes the Los Angeles nights are balmy and unbearable, but tonight it feels like we brought the valley heat with us. I can hear her breathing heavily behind me, but I do not turn around. We hardly need the other passengers as our guides anymore. We're walking quickly enough to show we're determined, not lost or tired, and our pace blends us into the life on the sidewalk. The late shift weekend workers waiting at the city bus benches, the exhaust of the taxi cabs idling at the corners, boys on bikes who are too young to be out so late, the hot fluorescence of a tiendita, its vegetables wilting in the heat. How much further? Natalia finally says, and when I turn around, I can see the sweat stains in dark circles under her arms, how hard she tries to not show a slight limp in her right foot, a blister, no doubt. 2 more blocks, I tell her. So where they're gonna go is a motel, and Griselda tells her, I want you to be very quiet as we get into this motel, because it's just gonna be the 2 of us, and then we'll plan our next moment. It's also just an excuse to give you a glass, drink of water. So now they're safely in the room, and they're about to eat. She kicks off her white high heels and rubs her feet while I eat my sandwich. I can see the red patches where blisters will appear in the morning. Eat, I tell her. We need to be up early. I'm surprised when she doesn't open her Vienna sausage tins and saltines, but takes out her last 2 cold tacos, as if standing in the glare of the tiendita taught her that the only food she should ever bring along is the kind that can keep. I don't have any money, Natalia starts. I had to spend it on her room anyway, I tell her, but tomorrow, you're on your own. The moment I say it, the words sound cruel, but there's no way to explain to her what self-reliance means without bringing up the past. She doesn't need to know my past. She doesn't even know my name. You're lucky, I tell her. Sometimes people are not kind, especially other women who are by themselves. I hope my luck doesn't run out tomorrow. He'll show up, I say, but he may not. And the better part of me is already thinking ahead to the kind of person I am if Timoteo shows up in the morning and I go back to my life by forgetting about her. So why aren't you married? I ask her. I'm looking at her hands, again, her fingers, and thinking about the man she's come to get. I want to get married, Natalia answers, but I have to wait for him to ask. Do you have children? No, she says, not yet. You better marry him, I say, hearing the longing in her voice, knowing how much harder it will be if he saddles her with his children before disappearing. But you're not married. So she noticed my bare hands too. He's too afraid to marry me. Men are always afraid. No, I say, he's not afraid of marriage. I'm a citizen. I've been telling him for years that marriage would solve a lot of our problems. When he asks me what we have to do, I tell him we have to go to City Hall and get a license, and that's what he gets afraid. Like a lot of people, he's scared of the government. Everyone should be afraid of the government. Maybe in Mexico, I tell her, but I was born here, and I don't let anybody push me around. Natalia looks at me as if this revelation is beyond belief. She puts down the last bite of her taco and smooths the empty shopping bag flat against the little table. I can see from her face that a wave of relief has crossed it, that my determination comes from a place she can name, maybe even get to. I think again of the young Natalia from my girl days and Carla, too, and wonder if it would have made a difference if someone had told them more about the world. I was born in Texas, I tell her. I went to school for a little bit, and that's how I know English. For once, this means something, and all the despair I've ever had about being no better off than where I come from dims in the light of Natalia's silence, the futility of her white shoes and her purple dress, with no one in this new world to show her how to survive. Eat, I tell her, motioning to the last bite. My sandwich is almost gone, the soda flat and warm, and as soon as I take the last mouthful, I know I'm going to rise and prepare for bed. I look down at Natalia's reddened feet. We have the same shoe size, I bet. You think so? I lean down and hand her my sneaker. Try it on. When it fits her like a glove, I get it from the chair and go to the bathroom, taking off my socks. I turn on the water and plug the sink. Why don't you wear the sneakers tomorrow? I tell her. dipping the socks in the water and wrapping the motel soap to wash them for her. She's silent in the next room, maybe with the sneakers still on her single foot, maybe with a taco unfinished on the table, but she could hear my determination in the splashing of the water and the soap. Natalia must be no more than 19 or 20 years old. Even if her man shows up, I know he won't be much to worry about. It's not my place to correct her mistake in placing so much trust in one man, but at least I can see that she knows how to spot the resilience in another woman and learn from it. Like my two schoolyard friends, the little Natalia, the little Carla, wherever my poor girls ended up. I closed the bathroom door to wash up and prepare to bed, hang the socks to dry. On any other night, I would take off my bra and panties to wash in the sink and dry overnight, sleep in some comfort, but I would be a fool to trust Natalia completely. Now I have to hide the money in one of my bra cups, safely next to me, once I drift off, dead tired. My panties are tattered. I don't have to impress Timoteo anymore, but I hate that I'll have to wear them 2 days in a row without washing. We need to sleep soon, I say when I walk back out, and Natalia complies. She tidies the table and washes up in the bathroom, but when she emerges, she still has her purple dress on. She crosses the room to turn off the light before she undresses, and the darkness amplifies the street noise of late-night Los Angeles. The far-off sirens, the men's voices faint on the street, always sinister no matter what they're talking about. Natalia takes her side of the bed and doesn't move for the longest time, but I can tell by her breathing that she can't sleep, that she's afraid of tomorrow. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to when they finally go to the park the next day, and she's given her the shoes. So this is what they're going to do. Los Angeles is different in the daytime, but it is Sunday morning, just like everywhere else. Quiet, just a few cars on the street, older ladies walking to church. The Mexican bakery from the park is busy. People coming out with white bags, and I remember the days when Timoteo had shown up early enough to get some sweet bread and coffee already waiting for me. But it's too early, and we would make only one round at the park before my feet start to hurt. There are men around, but not very many yet. I motion her to an empty bench. You should put your purse in your shopping bag if it fits, I tell her. It might, she says, about to try, but put my hand on her arm. Put this in your purse, I say, reaching into my bra and pulling out the little wad of bills and a piece of paper tucked between them. Quickly, don't lose it. You don't have to quickly, I say again, and she opens her purse and I drop the money inside, a deep pocket of nothing, just as I suspected. No wallet, therefore no identification, no address book either, no gum, no mints, no tissue, no rolls of coins for the copy machine, for the tampon dispenser, no nothing. I left home when I was 18, I tell her, and somehow I made it here. I sigh just from how good it feels to tell someone who I am, how good it feels to admit to myself that I want her to know someone like me can help. But I know enough to let it rest, to not say the rest of the story. It's too long anyway, and we don't have all day. All around us, the park starts to bustle with people. I know that most of us are waiting, but not everyone. Some are citizens, some are not. Some are out walking to their Sunday jobs, lucky to have something to do. Some are out walking just to relieve themselves of the boredom of being stuck at home, unemployed. To walk in the park, to sit in it as if we were doing, it doesn't feel like a luxury like I imagined for all those women on the television. They lounge on a beach and wish time would never end. Here it ends the minute my man shows up. And here he comes. I can spot Timoteo's small round shape, even if his t-shirt is just as white and plain as everyone else's. And I raise my hand to capture his attention, but I don't wave it. I leave it straight up in the air like a flag. Timoteo doesn't hug me or kiss me, but he grabs my hand and squeezes it briefly in greeting. He looks at Natalia for a moment, trying to decide if we're friendly or simply sharing space, and then I introduce her. Natalia, I tell him, mi amiga. Timoteo nods at her and takes my hand again, impatient to get going. He asks her no questions, ready to move on with their lives. The day is early, and I could invite Natalia to come with us to the Mexican bakery or to one of the food carts a few blocks away, where Timoteo likes to get a grilled corn cob, sprinkled with chile and lime. But she has her life to live, and I have mine. Bueno, I tell her, suerte. And I say it with enough certainty and finality for her to know that she need do nothing, not return the money, not return the shoes, not thank me for the money, except make the right choice when her man fails to show up in the park. I turn quickly before I have to see her eyes water from the fear of being alone, and I clutch Timoteo's elbow when he turns around to look at her, a flash of what might be alarm on his face. Come, I tell him. We walk back to the bus station, and it's only when Timoteo sees that I'm having trouble walking that he spots the high heels. There's too many men in the park for you to be wearing shoes like that, he says. His comment is neither stern nor kind. He knows my temperament well enough not to raise his voice to me. Even so, he's quiet for the few hours we wait in the bus station for our afternoon departure. He sits hunched over, elbows on his knees, as if he's contemplating Natalia more than me. He lets me have my silence. What we must look like to other people, I wonder, neither one of us with a ring on our fingers. Once we're on the bus, he takes the window seat. It's only then that I see how exhausted he is. Nothing new is ever in his stories about how he got back. The coming back is always stressful, always tense, and his reliance on me to be there outweighs his doubt. If this is love, then it's as simple as it gets. The bus driver comes down the aisle to do a final count, and I lean back in my seat. I can hear him count under his breath, and his slow, steady footsteps make me drowsy. Remind me of old, stern Mrs. Rolnick back in Texas, pacing along the rows of desks that she calmly read to us after lunch for 15 minutes. Back then, I loved nothing more than the brown newsprint where I tallied numbers and blocked out letters, the cool feel of the desktop when I rested my head as she read. Back then, there was so much hope. Do something with your life, Griselda. The rich feel of the ribbon in my hand when she placed it there, like a promise of things to come. The bus backs out of the station. Nothing will stop its determination to take us back home. The cool feel of resting my head on the desktop. 15 minutes, just enough time to dream. Timoteo is already as fast asleep, his head against the window, and I would do anything to rest my head against his shoulder, to nestle there. Ahead of me, the other women and their men face forward, together and stoic, all of them alert to the city streets, to what's passing by and what's coming. It's still love, the back of their heads seem to say to me. Not one woman is resting her head on her man's shoulder, so I sit upright and look straight out into the distance.